and welcome to It's the Economy. I'm Kathy Partridge, your host, and tonight I'm so honored and proud to be broadcasting from my hometown of Longmont, Colorado. For the first time, and these folks are proud because this new center, the 723 Center here on Main Street, the Longmont Progressive Center, is billed as a place where how does this go? A place where the experience of democracy happens. Tonight we're taking part in an economic lecture series, the first in a series, with speaker Steve Elliot. And the topic will be, it's not left or right, it's efficient, effective government. He will lead us through a conversation about large economic and political issues facing government today, arguing that solutions will not be found through the old paradigms of left and right. So Steve Elliot has been a resident of Boulder County since 1965 and is currently the Chief Deputy Treasurer of Boulder County, an office he has held for the last 4 years. Steve Elliot has been an entrepreneur, including operating a recording studio in Boulder during the 70s, and, among other things, laying the groundwork for KGNU, for which we are very grateful, back in that era as an integral part of a community free school class, which envisioned the idea of a community-based radio station for Boulder that has grown into KGNU as we know it. He was an integral part of this community free school as well as Longmont Free University, and is currently on the board for the Friends of the Longmont Library, and he teaches Tai Chi, as well as raising bees here in Boulder County. So KGNU is pleased to be broadcasting live again from 723 Main Street, the 723 Longmont Progressive Center, and I will hand the microphone over to Steve Elliot. Thank you for joining us here, Steve.
Thank you, Kathy. All right. I got hired on to the job of Chief Deputy Treasurer by Bob Hullinghorst, the Treasurer of Boulder County. 4 years ago, tomorrow, I started work on April Fool's Day, an auspicious moment. And when I walked in, Bob handed me a book called Lean Thinking by Jim Womack and said, "We're going to do this." And I went, okay. So I read the book, and since then we've been trying our best to start doing lean things with government. So I want to show you what we're doing, what some other folks are doing, and what's going on. So as you know, times are tough. I haven't heard anything about a stimulus package lately that people are taking advantage of. Thanks to some events in 2008, property values are down, which means the amount of taxes that the county can raise is going to go down. Sales taxes plummeted. Longmont got in serious trouble because the sales taxes dived. Now we're hoping they're going to be flat for a little bit. Who knows? They could go up. As we know right now, the state is looking at a shortfall of serious money on the order of what? $1.2 billion that they're trying to chop out of the budget right now. Not a pretty sight. And citizens are rallying to the cry for less taxes, less government, less everything. And because they're feeling the pinch too with all of their taxes. So what do you do when you get into trouble like that? Well, we rely on 3 time-honored solutions. The first is my favorite: reorganize. And you see it. You see it around, reorganization. Now, I had a quote from Pliny the Elder from 42 BC that said, "We were just beginning to work as a team, and then they reorganized us, and now we can't figure out what's going on." So reorganization has been around, but it's not very effective. The next thing you do is you attack the budget. And there are several ways to attack the budget. The easy way out is to tell the folks in the department level below you they have to cut 10%. and make them deal with it. The harder way to do it is what the state legislature is doing right now. It's go through and line by line start cutting things out. Now the problem with that is that when you're sitting looking at an Excel spreadsheet and just chopping off things line by line, what you're looking at is the name of the thing and the dollar amount and whether you think we can get along without it. And what you don't know is what the effects of chopping that line out could be later down the line. For instance, Pueblo County. The engineers, software engineers of Pueblo County took 10 years to write a new treasurer's software system. And one of the things they wanted to do was sell the services of running a treasurer's office to several of the smaller counties around Pueblo. And they would be the server, and they would keep the backup of all the stuff, and they would let those counties run their treasurer's office off of their software that they took 10 years to write. However, the county government sliced travel off of their budget. So they can't drive to the next county to demo the software that they would like to sell those counties. So it looks good, but there are ramifications that can hurt you later. So you can attack the budget, and it works, and you have to do it sometimes, because if you don't have the money, you got to do something. But the obvious one is to squeeze the employees. And we know those techniques. We got the hiring freezes, we got the 4-day work weeks, we got the forced furloughs, all of which are ways to take the money out of the largest chunk of your budget, which is the salaries. And did I mention, meanwhile, while you're doing all this stuff, the demand for government services is rising. So, who's the happiest lot when you take all of these things and start putting them into place? When you reorganize, who's the happiest folks? Managers. Who are the people that get the brunt of all this? That would be the staff, who have to now teach their new manager what they do. When you start cutting the budget, who takes the brunt of that? That would be the staff. When you start squeezing their salaries and cutting it by 10% by making them or 20% by giving them a 4-day work week, who suffers? The staff. When the demand for services is growing, who suffers? The staff. Does this make for a happy staff when you walk in the front door and go to the counter? Or does this make for a grumpy staff? There's constituent services, absolutely. So, yeah. So what I'd like to show you tonight is folks have missed another way. And this other way has been around, and it started in manufacturing, and it's gone to insurance, it's gone to hospitals, and government is the last to figure it out. So this is called lean thinking. Lean thinking was invented by Toyota. And Toyota has their approach to this, which is called lean thinking. And the other side of this is Six Sigma. And Six Sigma was invented by Motorola. And Motorola created Six Sigma University, and a couple of folks that graduated from Six Sigma University were from GE, and GE took it and ran with it. So the difference is that lean thinking tries to improve processes a little bit each time. It's find a problem, fix it. Find another problem, fix it. Find another problem, fix it. Six Sigma likes to look at the entire process all at once, take it all apart, reorganize it, and put the whole thing back together. Much bigger project. A lean process might take a week to change one small thing. A Six Sigma process might take 6 months and end up with a whole warehouse that's being reorganized and put back together in a different way. But they are complementary because they're both trying to do the same thing, and they're both based on processes. And when we say that this isn't political, it isn't left, it isn't right, it's operations. And so it isn't something that you have to argue politics about. It's like, is there a better way to do this? If the answer is yes, let's do it that way. And the result of that, strangely enough, is quite often more efficient organizations and the saving of money. So what is lean thinking? There are two precepts. The first is produce value for the customer. Now, the first thing you have to do is figure out who your customer is. So we are Boulder County, where I work, and we started looking at who our customers are, and we came up with a list of 17 customers. We got title guarantee companies, we got banks, we got the commissioners, we got the state of Colorado that we owe reports to, and we came up with a list of 17 different customers. Now, who's not on that list? Taxpayers. Taxpayers aren't customers. Taxpayers are shareholders. Taxpayers give you money, and what do they want in return for that money? They want to know that that money is being used wisely. And so our obligation is to use the money wisely, not waste it, and do the things that they want. All right? What they want is sometimes hard to discern. Right? Now, the other thing we need to do is eliminate waste. So producing value for the customer works two ways. One of it is, imagine I'm a county employee and I'm sitting there, and I should imagine that there is a taxpayer standing behind me and looking over my shoulder, and they should have a thumbs up or a thumbs down on whether or not they'd be willing to spend money on what you're doing right now. And if you're doing something that they think is worthwhile, you get the thumbs up. If you're doing something that they don't think is worthwhile, you get the thumbs down. Reorganizing the papers on my desk? Not so much. All right? Going to a meeting on what I should be doing with my trash? Not so much. All right? Going to a meeting on how to make things more efficient so that we can move stuff through the office faster? They might go along with that. All right? So that's one way, which is the thing that I'm doing right now, producing value for the customer. If I'm working on a license or filling out a certificate or working on something that's going to be produced and handed to a customer, that's of value for the customer. The other side of that is, if the customer wants something and they're willing to pay for it and we're not doing it, we should be doing it. So that's the other side of value for the customer. So I was going to mention, when we were talking about the poor government employees, the definition of a government employee, thanks to Ken Miller, is a bunch of hardworking people trapped in dysfunctional systems doing invisible things for people that don't care on behalf of other people that do care, the legislature, but can't articulate what they want. So that's the problem for the staff that's trying to do all this. I mean, what happens is down the state legislature, they're changing the stuff every year. There's a new piece of legislation, and now the government employees got to figure out how to do it. So, on to eliminating waste. Japanese term for waste is muda, and there are 8 kinds of muda. So the Japanese dissect everything. So when you start thinking about it, you want to dissect what waste is so that you can recognize it. And you want to open up people's eyes to what waste really is, because it's all around you. And the problem is that once you see these 8 things, you start seeing it everywhere, right? You start standing in line behind a cash register, and you start going, well, that's muda. You know what I'd do? I'd move it around over here, and they need an extra cash register over here, and then they need to, So, material waste is waste. We all know about that stuff, the stuff you throw away. Piece of cake. Waiting is waste. Now, how do you know? The problem is, if you're on an assembly line at Toyota, and there's a car coming down the assembly line and something stopped and the car is sitting there, you know that it's waiting. How do you tell that there's waiting going on in the government? Well, it used to be you could walk in and see somebody's inbox. Now it's harder to see because the inbox is their email inbox. So you got to go dig for it, and it's harder to root out where the waiting is happening. But you want to eliminate waiting, and there's a lot of ways to do it. We'll talk about that. So moving stuff to people is a waste. If somebody is standing there waiting for their laptop to boot, that's moving the stuff to the person they're waiting for, right? If we have 250 kids out working on trails during the summer and they're waiting for somebody to drive up in a van with shovels and picks so they can start making trails, they're waiting, and that's waste because we're not using them. So you need to plan ahead, get the tools there so that when the kids show up, you can start making trails right away. So moving stuff to people is waste. Conversely, moving people to stuff is a waste. So if you have a meeting in Boulder and somebody from the Longmont office has to drive into Boulder to go to that meeting and then have a half-hour meeting and then drive back, it's a half hour there and a half hour back. That's an hour of waste. Not to mention some gas, not to mention some, use of a vehicle, et cetera, et cetera. When you start thinking of it that way, the little $50 camera that you can put on top of your computer to have a video conference starts paying for itself real fast. So, moving people to stuff is a waste. Inventory is waste. Inventory is waste, and when you get to government, printing 2,597 forms and having them sitting in a supply closet is waste. Because I can guarantee you that 6 months from now, somebody's going to make a change to that form. So where'd that form go? In the recycle bin. Having that form as an electronic document that you only print out if and when you need it is a reduction in inventory. All right? And when you start thinking about it, having physical inventory, you got to provide space, you got to provide heat, you got to take care of that inventory. It starts really mounting up. We cleaned out a supply closet. One of the things we found was 12 toner cartridges for a fax machine we hadn't owned for 2 years. So inventory is waste, and you reduce it down. Overproduction is waste. If you're putting out energy and making something and then it doesn't get used, that's waste. What does that look like in the government? It's a report that nobody reads. So one of the techniques for that is make the report, don't send it out. If people call and say, "Where's that report?" you send it to them. If they don't call, don't do the report anymore. So you got to watch for that stuff, and you watch for overproduction. Mistakes are waste. And mistakes mean you got to do the whole thing over again. That costs people time, that costs equipment time, that costs material time, all of that kind of stuff. Now, mistakes are a serious problem in government, and this is where you start having to think about changing the culture. How are you going to find out about mistakes if the culture is, if you make a mistake, it goes on your personnel file? Not a good plan. You got to change the culture, and what's the right approach to mistakes? If you make a mistake, you show everybody what the mistake is, and you get a bonus. You can't fix a mistake unless you know it's there. Now, the way Toyota did this was they have what they call, and there's going to be a lot of Japanese terminology in here, they have an and-on button. And the and-on button is a red button on the conveyor belt where the cars are being created. And if any employee sees a mistake, they hit the button. They stop the assembly line. Everybody comes to the button and says, "What happened?" And this employee says, "It's missing a bolt." And everybody goes, "Ooh." And then they start working their way back up the line to find out where in the line was that bolt supposed to be put on, And how did it happen that a mistake was made that the bolt did not get put on? And what can we do to make sure that never happens again? And they've done clever things at Toyota, like they have a machine, you know, the little coin ejector machines that you get your change and it drops out the coins. As the car comes up, it breaks an electric eye. The electric eye drops down the 5 bolts that are needed for that point into a box, and there is an electric eye that the person who's putting the bolts on has to break when they reach in to grab the bolts. And the car won't go on unless their hand goes in and breaks the electric eye and grabs the bolts to put on the car. So you want to mistake-proof situations. One of the mistakes in the county is wrong addresses. This is a favorite of mine. My job is to collect property taxes. It is easier to collect property taxes if I can mail a tax notice to somebody and they get it. So we're careful about addresses. And when somebody sends puts an address in and it's to Stagecoach Road, how do you know if it's stage space coach or Stagecoach, all one word, right? And it turns out, does anybody own a Dymo label maker? I see a hand over here. There's a little button on the Dymo label maker. You paste the address in there, you hit the button, it automatically goes to the U.S. Post Office, checks the address, brings it back, does the proper address, and adds the 9 digits to the zip code. And it's a wonderful thing, and I paste that into our data where the address is, and it's perfect from the start. It's what the post office says is the right address. So our tax notice has a better chance of getting there. So that's mistake proofing. And you don't let people make up inventions for how to abbreviate way. The proper abbreviation for way is W-A-Y. I have lots of people that want to abbreviate it W-Y. I figured this out when I got an envelope back from Wyoming. All right? So, mistakes are muda. And the last one is not using available resources. And I'll tell you a little story about available resources in a second. So, how does lean work? You got to use your secret weapon. Is this an appropriate time for me to do a pause so you can break in? Kathy's going to break in and do a little station break here.
Thank you, Steve. This is It's the Economy, and I'm your host this evening, Kathy Partridge, broadcasting live for the very first time from the 723 Longmont Progressive Center at 723 Main Street here in my hometown of Longmont, Colorado. It's the Economy every week features latest thinking, ideas, and viewpoints concerning the state of the economy around the world and in our country, and we're honing in on a local level this evening with county level government in general, but in particular, happy to have Steve Elliot with us, the Chief Deputy Treasurer of Boulder County. Our topic is It's Not Left or Right, It's Efficient, Effective Government. Thank you for joining us, Steve, and now back to you.
Okay. So I tried to give suspense here. So you're using your secret weapon. And the secret weapon is a high-paid consultant you fly in from New York. Wrong. The secret weapon is your staff. They've been telling you for years that this is wrong and it's broken and it doesn't work. But you haven't been listening. So what does Lean do? Lean gives your staff tools that helps them figure out what's wrong and helps them figure out how to make it right. The tools are very general purpose. The tools are things like flowcharts, things like measurement tools. How do you measure, right? And you want to measure before and after you do whatever you're going to do to the process to prove that it worked. Or if it didn't work, now we know that that didn't work, we got to try something else. And we want to give them tools for ways to analyze what's going on without placing blame. So you got to change the culture. And it's your staff. And your staff knows your customers, knows what the customers want, knows what's coming in, knows what's going out, what has to go out to the state to a report, what has to go to the commissioners as a report, and they know what's needed, and they're the ones that can tell you what's the best way to do it once you show them how to point out what's wrong and give them some ideas about what you can do to make it right. The biggest thing you give your staff is the freedom to think about their job. Part of the problem is that if you're a government employee, you get into a rut of coming to work every day and doing your job. And you wince every time you get to something that's wrong, but nothing I can do about that. All right, on to the next. So this says we're going to take the time to stop and look at the process and see how we can make the process better. So what happens when you give employees the freedom to think? So this slide here for our radio audience is 8 people who are on a team from the Minnesota Department of Health, and they're standing in front of a whiteboard that has a whole bunch of sticky notes on it. And sticky notes are another one of your great secret weapons, because you put processes on there and you move them up and you move them around and you decide what to do first and what to do second. This team got together. Their job was put together bottles for the Department of Health that have certain stuff in them. And they looked at their process, and you don't have to believe me, on their website it says they reduced the time it took to put a bottle together of medicine by 94%. All right? Not bad. All right? Here's Fort Wayne, Indiana. And if you go to the Fort Wayne webpage and start looking at their list of projects, they got 42 of them listed. I picked the first one off the list. The problem was that they're installing water mains and it's expensive. And so the crew from the city utilities that was in charge of working on water mains said, what can we do about this? And they discovered that they could get the price of water mains reduced from 61 bucks a foot to $49 a foot. And for the project they were working on, each dollar reduced that project by $32,000. And so far they've saved $317,000. Now what did they do that was so crazy that it saved all this money? They put the bids out for the winter. And the contractor said, a job in the winter? Cool, yeah, I'll give you a discount. Keep my guys working, keep my equipment working? You bet. I'll give you $12 a foot off of the job. Not bad. All right. Erie County, New York. In 2007, Erie County, New York was so close to bankruptcy that the governor had put a fiscal committee in place to sign every check. And they were doomed, and they were sinking fast. And a guy named Chris Collins ran for, their office is called county manager, and it would be akin to John Hickenlooper being the governor of the state. So the way their county government is organized is the manager is that position for the county. And there were 25 departments in Erie County, New York. They have 5,000 employees. Buffalo, New York is the big city that they're close to. So Chris Collins ran on the platform that we're going to run this county like a business. And he came from Westinghouse, where he had learned Lean Six Sigma at Westinghouse. He was elected. He came to the first meeting in January. He got the 25 department heads in there, and he said, okay, here's my plan. We're going to do Lean Six Sigma. I'm going to run this the way that we ran Westinghouse, and what I plan to do is take apart every process in the county and revitalize it, refigure it, and make it better and optimize it. Who is with me? And 4 hands shot up and said, I've been waiting for this day. He fired the other 21 department heads. Now that makes everybody else sit up straight in their seat. The next thing he did was he got a grant and created an education program with the University of Buffalo School of Business, and they started training people in the county how to do Lean Six Sigma. That grant cost them $700,000, and in the first year, they brought in a person to organize the whole Lean project, and they sent people to school. That was $700,000, big output. The next year, they put the program in place, saved $7.1 million. That's a 10-to-1 payback. That's a return on investment. Not bad. Now, once you start seeing this stuff and you're able to see Muda, you start seeing it everywhere. One of the guys in accounting was staying up late one night and he got the ad. Have you ever seen this ad on TV? Credit card debt. Consolidate your bills. Reduce your payments. And he looked at this ad and he went, huh. I wonder, and the next day he went back to work and he got out the list of all of the bonds that Erie County had. And he looked at the interest rate on all of those bonds. And he said, I wonder what would happen if we took all of these bonds, which added up to $250 million, and we consolidated them into one bond, and right now I can get lower interest on the thing. Let's do it. So they did it. And they consolidated all the bonds. They put out one huge bond. They reduced the interest that they were paying. And have you ever refinanced a house? What's the one big bonus you get when you refinance your house? You skip a payment. You get a free month. You don't have to make any payments. They made $25 million that month that they put in the bank. The next year, Chris Collins got up and gave his state of the county address, and they had $42 million in cash reserves after 2 years of doing Lean Six Sigma. So they're doing a whole bunch of fun things. One of the things that the guy's name is Bill Carey, who is running the projects. And he said, Chris Collins pulled me into a room, stood me up and said, this is Bill, he's going to solve all your problems. I got another meeting, Bill, take over. He said, I looked around and I'm in front of the sheriff's department and everybody's wearing guns. So he started talking about, what's the biggest problem you guys have? And one of the guys came up with, okay, here's a problem that I just had one today and I want to get rid of this problem. And the problem is that we got the jail, we got the courthouse, we put the guys in the bus, we take them over to the courthouse, and after everybody's done with all of their court appearances, we put them back in the bus, and on the way back there's these huge fights. And I had a guy that I ended up having to take to the hospital for stitches because of a fight on the way back. And so they started doing this brainstorming session. Why are we having fights on the way back? Well, the reason they're having fights on the way back is some of the guys got released at court. And on the way back, they're going, neener, 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 I'm going home, you're going to jail, neener, neener. Bam, big fight, all right? So they decided they were going to fix this. So what did it cost them to fix it? They had to put an extra terminal at the courthouse so that they could release the prisoner when they were released by the judge. And that person didn't go back on the bus. And that person was very happy not to go back on the bus. And there were no more fights. And no more trips to the hospital. And no more lawsuits from, you didn't protect my son, because he got in a fight on the bus on the way back. Now, that's a cheap fix that saved money. And it saved more than you think, because the county had to pay their lawyers to defend themselves from all of these lawsuits that they were getting. So little changes make a big difference. Okay, here's another little technique. You notice that on this slide, this is a real high-tech thing. We got a whiteboard and sticky notes, all right? So I was at a conference learning this stuff, and we broke out into small groups, and this was our project. And the project was fixing potholes for the city. And the guy was the city manager, and we said, okay, what's the current situation with fixing potholes? And he says, piece of cake. We fix potholes in 33 days. And we went, huh? He says, yeah. Well, Marvin's been the superintendent of streets for 30 years, and he's in charge, and the way he does it is he takes the city and he draws 4 big quadrants to the city, and week 1, we do this quadrant, and week 2, we do this quadrant, and week 3, we do this quadrant. right? And if you happen to call in and you're in quadrant 3 and they just got you last week, you're going to take 3 weeks before they get around to your quadrant to fixing your pothole. So we started noodling around, and one of the things that you'll notice, and this happens everywhere, not only government, but everywhere, we mark down 2 things above the sticky notes. On the upper left-hand corner, we mark down how long it takes to actually do the work. So the call comes in and the receptionist gets the call, and it takes her 3 minutes on the phone with the person to figure out where the pothole is and listen to them rant and rave about the problem and their missing hubcap and everything else. And then you figure out what is the elapsed time before that process is done and it moves on to the next step. So in her case, it's 3 minutes for her to listen to the customer, and in 5 minutes she can move it on to the next step, which is she hands it off to somebody who has to go look it up on a map to make sure it's actually within the city limits. So they take the stuff, they get the map out, they find out whether or not it's in the city limits. It takes 10 minutes for that person to figure out if that's a legit thing, and it may take 15 minutes before they pass it on to Marvin. Now Marvin's the supervisor, and it takes him 5 minutes to schedule when that's going to be done. But it takes a week before it moves off of his schedule to the crew, because he only does it Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock when he's making out the schedule for next week, right? So it's sitting there for a week. Now, remember our list of Muda? Was one of them waiting? All right? So there's a little bit of gap here between the 5 minutes it takes him to schedule it and the 1 week that it takes for it to arrive at the crew. So the crew, Monday morning, gets the list. And this is your quadrant. And when they get out to a pothole with a warm load of asphalt on the back of the truck, it takes them about 45 minutes to fix a pothole. But it can take them 25 days to get around to your pothole because of this whole scene with the quad. And then when they come back, or it takes them 1 minute to write down on the clipboard, pothole fixed, right? But it takes a whole day for it to get back because it doesn't show up on the supervisor's desk until they get back from running all their stuff and hand the paperwork in, all right? So we started brainstorming. So what are a couple of ways you could perhaps reduce the time on this? And Denver has done this, by the way. John Hickenlooper had a whole process to work on this. So what were the techniques that John Hickenlooper's crews came up with to make this a little faster? And the first thing you have to do is borrow or steal ideas from somebody else who has done it before. Who's pretty good at getting to addresses? UPS, FedEx, those guys. What do they have? They have a secret program that you put in a bunch of addresses, and now this is, Google can do it for you too. You put in a whole bunch of addresses and it'll draw you the shortest route to that whole set of addresses. Now gone is the quadrant. Now you have a set of addresses, and now you get a list that says drive here, fix this pothole, drive here, fix this pothole. And you discover that if you start doing that, you start catching up on potholes really fast, right? Now there was one other thing, there was a rule that they put in place when they were out with the hot truck full of asphalt. And that is, if you're on your way to fix a pothole and you come across a pothole, fix it. And when you do that, you're right here fixing the pothole, and you don't have to worry about logging a call from a citizen who's complaining about it. You don't have to worry about scheduling it. You just fix it. And all that other stuff goes away. All right. So just putting this stuff down and saying, how does it work, and putting the sticky notes up on the board, you know you're getting somewhere when people start laughing. You know? The crew starts looking and going, why were we doing it this way? So the list goes on and on. Government's starting to figure this out. Cape Coral, Florida, Grand Rapids, Michigan, Jacksonville, Florida, Maine Department of Labor, Denver Public Schools, who in the first 6 months saved $1.5 million in bus maintenance just by sitting down and going through the thing. This is almost like drawing the city into quadrants. They asked the question, how are you replacing brake pads, filters, and oil? And the answer was, we just rotate the buses through. And when the bus comes in, we change it. And somebody said, is anybody looking at the odometer? And some of the buses are making little local trips, going weep wop, weep wop, weep wop. And some of the buses are running all the way up to Evergreen. So the bus that's running up to Evergreen is putting more miles on and should be getting more frequent, time-wise, changes for brake pads since they're going up the mountain. Whereas the local bus making little local stops is not putting as many miles on, and they may not need to have those brakes replaced as often. So here's the culture problem. Well, if we're not doing all this stuff, what are we going to do to look busy? You going to fire me? Now, this is one of the things you cannot do. If you're going to put this stuff into place, you cannot ask the worker, so Strider, give me a couple of ideas about how I can get rid of your job. Yeah. So Strider's not going to come forth with many really good ideas right away, you know. So you have to start this thing off by saying nobody's going to lose their job because of Lean Six Sigma. You may get moved and retrained, and we may drop the number of people who are on the staff through retirement, attrition, and that kind of stuff, but that means that people are going to move up, and hopefully the jobs that we're eliminating are going to be the lower jobs. And so back to the buses and the mechanics, they're going, what are you going to do with this? They said, we're going to find something for you to do. What do we got? And they started looking around, and it turns out Denver Public Schools had an outside contract with a company to repair all the lawnmowers. They went, oh, well, we could fix lawnmowers. I can do that. And so they retrained a bunch of guys on how to sharpen lawnmowers and how to do the maintenance on the lawnmowers. They brought in all the lawnmowers. Now the mechanics are doing that stuff. Not only did they save money on the contract, it turns out that they haven't had one critical breakdown of lawnmowers since they started doing it. And before, the company maybe wasn't as efficient as they said they were going to be in the contract. And lawnmowers are breaking down, and now you're driving a trailer out there and you're hauling them in and you're doing emergency repairs, and the grass isn't getting cut. Now the grass is getting cut and the maintenance is happening. So, I'm going to give you a couple of stories about the Boulder County Treasurer's Office. So, one of the things we do is we handle checks. We handle 300,000 checks a year. So, we started working on this in 2007. We started putting together our little process in 2008. We measured what we did, and we had these little check scanners, and so everybody we would open up the mail, and we would sort them. One check, one payment, one check, many properties, many checks from the wife and the ex-husband for one property, and many checks for many properties, all right? So we had to sort them all and group them, and then we would run them through the little scanner, and then when we create a deposit, we would send it to the bank and all that stuff. So we have 3 tax deadlines a year, and the week prior to those tax deadlines, we were getting every day 7, count them, 7 of those post office mail tubs of mail for that week. And it was taken, the staff, we have 10 people on the staff, and it was taken a half a day for all 10 of those people to open the envelopes and pull the checks out and sort them into the right stuff and get them scanned. So the last thing on the MUTA list was, this is a pop quiz, not using available resources. So we looked around, and it turns out that when you deal with a bank, the way a commercial account works is if you have an average daily balance and they give you credit towards bank charges based on your average daily balance. Our average daily balance was giving us $5,000 a month in credits towards bank services that we weren't using. So I called up the bank and said, come out here and sell me some services. So they came out, told us what services they had to offer, and one of them was lockbox. And it turns out you can send checks directly to the bank. They will open the envelopes. They will scan them on their big Belchfire 12,000 scanner that just zips stuff through. It can read handwriting. I don't know how it does it, and we have a little coupon in there for, what's your property, and it reads that stuff, and they deposit it to your account instantly, and they send us an electronic file that says, this is the account number, this is how much we deposited to your account. We have a program that can take that file and load it into our system, one operator, half an hour. So, here's the before and after. In 2008, no lockbox. We hand processed 70,000 checks during one of our deadline periods. And it took us 20 hours for 5 days of that week to process them. It took us 1 to 2 days to get them all scanned and processed and into the bank. We would put that up on the website so that the person that sent their check in could see if their taxes had been paid. And we were losing $5,000 worth of credit from the bank. The next year, when we put lockbox into place, the bank did 62,849 checks that we never saw. We got the exceptions. I know you're going to find this hard to believe, but some people get the tax notice, tear off the coupon, and send in the top of the notice. 2,144 of those. Okay. It took our folks throughout the week about an hour today to process those exceptions. And it's people that tear the check off and pull off on the bottom of the check the bank routing number. That kind of stuff. All right, so those are the exceptions that we have to process. It took us about an hour a day to do it. The deposit went into the bank the same day. Now, ordinarily, if you were making interest, that would be a good thing because you'd make more interest on your money. Doesn't make any difference right now. And we would update the stuff on the web the very next day. Cost us nothing. 1 month, we had to pay $300 for this service during a deadline week. Not bad. All right. We had another one, which is certificates of taxes due. If you want to sell your house, the title guarantee company gets a certificate from the treasurer's office that says, this is what the taxes are today. And you're the seller, and today is March 31st, so you are 350 or 365ths of the taxes. So you owe this much money, and the buyer owes the rest of the money for the rest of the year. And we charge the title guarantee company $10 for this certificate of taxes due. Before, we had one employee that was doing it because we were doing 150 to 250 of those a day. All right? And the word was to the title guarantee companies, it takes us 3 days to do it. This employee is trying to do it in between phone calls and people walking up. So we sat down, we had a Lean Six Sigma process on this, and this is the flow chart. For those of you in radio land, it's a god-awful mess. And so then we took Microsoft Visio and we turned this into a better flow chart. It's still a mess, right? And when you do this, certain things pop out. For instance, if there's a rush order that comes in because the closing is today and we haven't got the certificate yet, you have to stop everything you're doing, you got to go in there and you got to do it, and it generates an error because it's going to be out of sequence, right? Because you've already started a bunch of other certificates, and now you're going to stick this one, and it's going to be out of sequence, so it generates an error. So we redid this whole thing, and we started looking at it, and each one of the squares on there, which is a step in the process, we said, is this something that's valuable or not valuable? And on this chart here, everything that's shaded in red is muda. This is wasted time. Some of it is waiting for Bill Gates to start up your machine, right? And loading up the program and getting this set up and all that kind of stuff. The stuff in green here was the value-added part of the process. And when you looked at it, of a day, 7 hours and 21 minutes in a day doing these certificates, 4 hours and 25 minutes was actually doing real work. 2 hours and 56 minutes was muda. And so we sat down and created a whole technique, new stream of processing, and guess what? We can do the certificates of taxes due in 4 hours. And we took that person and put them in the back, and they don't have to answer the phone. Because what happens is the phone rings, and they go, where was I? Did I do this one? Or they have to go back and look and see where they were and all that. So that was this process. The next one coming up, where we're writing software, we're letting the title guarantee companies check in with a user ID and a password. They do their own thing. It creates a PDF file and emails it back to them. 0 employees, turnaround time 2 minutes. We don't have to touch it. We still get the $10. That frees up an employee. That frees up an employee that started out being a full-time employee doing these, and that employee is now going to start tracking mobile homes. A moving target if I ever saw one. So, what do you do? How do you get started with this stuff? Well, the first thing is to get some training. You know, there's a guy, Ken Miller, I went to his workshop, and wonderful stuff. And there's belts for this. There's a white belt, which gives you the vocabulary. It's usually about a 3-day thing. There's a green belt, which is 90 hours worth of classroom, and you got to take a really hard test at the end of it. That gives you a green belt. A person with a green belt can actually run a project. All right, they can head up a team and walk them through the process. And then there's black belts, and a black belt should be able to monitor a half a dozen green belts who are all running processes and step in and show them what's going on. So, what Erie County, New York did was they partnered with the university and did all the training through them. You can go online. And just in case you thought I was making this stuff up, Lean for Dummies, Six Sigma for Dummies. I mean, you know, the books are out there. You can find this stuff. So you need to get educated. The American Society for Quality is the one who administers the tests. So everybody is taking the same tests. So if somebody says they're a green belt or a black belt, you know that they really did qualify for that. So down at Denver General Hospital, they have a board. They've been doing this since 2005. And they have a board. These are, since then, they have created 192 green belts at Denver General Hospital. The ones in yellow on this list, and I would say that's, you know, maybe an 1/8, are doctors. The ones in green are registered nurses. The white ones is regular staff. And the doctors had to sit down to a 45-hour class, bring your lunch, and take an entire week out of their life and go through this process. And Pat Gamow, who is the CEO, went to the head of the doctors and said, your doctors are going to become black belts and they got to do a week-long class. And he says, there's no way, doctor's too valuable. She says, way, and you're the first one. He went through the class, he came back, he called 3 doctors, he says, you're taking this class. And they have done amazing things. We'll see the little chart in a second. Now, with this comes great responsibility. Every black belt on this list is required to save $30,000 a year. And if you don't, your name goes up on the board. If you do, you get the bonus. All right? So, what you got to do is you got to get your leaders on board. This doesn't work from the ground up without anything at the top. So you got to have the leaders, and the leaders are the ones at Denver General Hospital. The department heads get together and they sit with the CEO and they say, okay, what are we working on? What's my goal? What are we going to do this year? They go out and create the teams and say, here's what we're going to work on. And here's how much money is up on the board that we promised we were going to save. All right? And leaders got to provide the direction, the support, and they got to be committed for the long run. Here's the graph from Denver General Hospital. Denver, it's Denver Health and Hospitals because it includes all of their clinics. All right? If you look at this graph, it's your classic exponential graph, which takes a long time to take off. This is 2005 when they started, and they went to then Mayor Hickenlooper at the end of 2005 and said, woohoo, we saved $5 million. Woohoo, woohoo, what do you think? Pretty cool, huh? Hickenlooper said, low-hanging fruit. Come back when you got something better. A year later, they came back and said, hey, we saved $10 million. He goes, low-hanging fruit. They came back the next year and said, we saved $12 million. He went, come back when you got something better. After 3 years, this started taking off. In the 6 years that they have been working this program, they've saved $87 million. They have not fired one person, but they're giving more services to more patients. Their pharmacists are putting out more prescriptions per pharmacist than they were when they started, with the same number of pharmacists. That's the kind of results that you get if you stick with it. It takes about 3 years for people to realize, maybe I'm not going to get fired if I show them where the problem is. And it takes 3 years for people to go, I guess they're serious. I guess we're going to do this. I guess I may as well get my black belt. Maybe I can get one of those $500 bonuses. All right? And it takes 3 years for people to be on committees. They now, of their 5,000 people on staff, over 1,000 people have been engaged in one of the lean projects to make one of the processes better. The word is out. Everybody knows what's going on. So what's the hard part? You got to change the culture. You got to turn problems from blame into bonus. You got to make people realize that the right thing to do is identify a problem and bring it out for everybody to look at. You got to stop saying if you mess up, it's going in your personnel file. You got to start saying if you point out a problem, you get the gold star of the week and you get first crack at the pizza. You know, you have to start changing the culture to saying finding problems is what we do. Fixing them is even better. Change the culture. You got to make sure that nobody loses their job. Erie County, New York was a union shop. The first thing that they did was bring in the union leaders and said, here's what we're doing. Nobody's losing their job. You might get retrained. You might get moved. But what are you going to do? You want the layoffs? You want the furloughs? We could do that. Or you can come and you can be a part of every team. So, the other thing you got to do is embrace resistance. We're wrapping up, right? So, last thing to tell you is we're going to do this in the state. State Bill 1212, my boss is Bob Hullinghorst. His wife is Dickie Lee Hullinghorst. State Bill 1212 has been presented. It went through committee. It passed unanimously. And we're waiting for it to go to the Senate.
And thank you. That was Steve Elliot, the Chief Deputy Treasurer of Boulder County, talking about lean, efficient government, ways to save money, be efficient, make cultural change, and build the economy. I'm Kathy Partridge. I've been your host this evening, here live from the Longmont Progressive Center, the 723 Progressive Center here on Main Street in Longmont, a place where the experiment of democracy happens. And I want to thank Dwayne Lease for organizing and hosting us tonight, Charles Hansen for his wonderful facilities. I'd like to thank Bob Hullinghorst. This is a shout out from Steve for his boss, the treasurer of Boulder County, and thank we've got the technical crew to thank too. This is great. There's a PowerPoint here. I'm loving this. Evan Perkins and Len Houle here from broadcasting from Longmont. Forrest Young-Taff in the Boulder studio. Thank you, Forrest, for being there. Cedar Wolf is videoing this for video on YouTube, working with Tom Lewis of TG Lewis Video Productions. Thank you to the audience here in Longmont, the listening audience at KGNU. We are KGNU Boulder, Denver, 88.5 FM, 1390 AM, and on the World Wide Web at kgnu.org. I'm Kathy Partridge, signing out for It's the Economy.